Think about your last conversation. Did you notice the exact second their tone shifted? Did you sense something was wrong before anyone said a word? If yes, this isn't overthinking, it's something deeper. There's a certain kind of person who walks into a room and immediately absorbs everything unspoken. They feel tension before it has a name. They notice when someone is pulling away, long before the distance becomes visible. Most people call this emotional intelligence, but here's what they miss. This level of awareness doesn't feel like a superpower. It feels like a light that refuses to turn off, illuminating every crack, every uncomfortable truth, even when all you want is rest. Psychology calls this hyperawareness, and by the end of this video, you'll understand not just what it is, but where it came from, why your brain works this way, and exactly how to carry this gift without letting it crush you. Most people move through life with the lights dimmed just enough to function. They notice what they need to notice, nothing more. But some minds don't have that switch. For them, awareness is always running, always scanning, always interpreting, and while that sounds like depth or intelligence, it often feels like living in a house made entirely of glass, where nothing is ever hidden, including the things you wish you couldn't see. For the overly aware mind, life isn't a series of simple moments. It's an equation running silently in the background. Every interaction becomes something to decode, not out of paranoia, but out of instinct. You don't just hear what someone says, you notice how long they pause before saying it. You don't just see a smile, you catch the half second it faded too quickly. You don't just read a message, you feel the weight of what wasn't written. Why did they phrase it that way? Why now and not earlier? Why does this room feel different today, even though everything looks exactly the same? While others exist fully in the moment, your mind works behind the scenes, connecting dots, tracking patterns, updating its internal map of social reality. It's like living with a second screen always open. One part of you is participating in life, the other is observing, analyzing, adjusting in real time. A casual text becomes data, a delayed reply becomes a signal, a shift in someone's tone becomes a puzzle that demands solving. And this constant processing is exhausting, not because it's negative, but because it never stops. Your brain treats relationships the way an engineer treats a complex system. If something changes, there must be a reason. So you search for it, you replay conversations, you scan for inconsistencies. The irony? None of this feels dramatic from inside your own head. It feels responsible, thoughtful, necessary. But here's what slowly happens without you noticing. The equation starts to replace the experience itself. You become so focused on understanding what life means that you forget to actually live inside it. Presence gets traded for precision, and that trade happens so gradually you don't realize it until you're exhausted. But the scanning doesn't stop at the external world. For many hyper-aware people, the most relentless observation happens internally. Psychology calls this metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking. For most people, it switches on occasionally. For the overly aware, it almost never switches off. You don't just feel an emotion, you immediately notice you're feeling it. Then you ask why. Then you evaluate whether that feeling is justified. Then you wonder what it reveals about you as a person. By the time the emotion finishes moving through your body, your mind has already dissected it from every angle. Sadness doesn't arrive alone. It comes packaged with questions. Is this reasonable? Is this an overreaction? Is this old pain resurfacing? Or something about right now? Even happiness gets intercepted. You feel joy and almost simultaneously step outside of it, watching yourself be happy, calculating how long it might last, anticipating what could interrupt it. It's like dancing while constantly checking your reflection. You might perfect every step, but somewhere along the way, you stop hearing the music. This second layer of observation creates depth, but it also creates distance. When you're always watching yourself, you're rarely fully inside anything. You become half participant, half narrator, half feeling, half analyzing. Over time, inner life transforms into quiet self-surveillance. Your thoughts are monitored, your emotions are evaluated, your reactions are filtered before they're even allowed to fully exist. What started as self-awareness slowly becomes self-interruption, and the painful irony is that it feels mature, intelligent, responsible. But the mind was never designed to be both the dancer and the critic simultaneously. If this resonates, type the number 1 in the comments. If you can still experience moments without this constant self-observation, type 0. I'm genuinely curious what the ratio looks like. Now here's the question that changes everything. Where did this come from? Why does your mind work this way when others seem to move through life so effortlessly unaware? This level of hyper-awareness doesn't appear randomly. It has a history, and for many people that history begins in childhood. In environments where emotions were unpredictable, where a parent's mood could shift without warning, where safety depended on reading subtle cues before things escalated, awareness wasn't a choice, it was survival. As a child, you may have learned to scan the room the moment you entered, to read the emotional temperature before deciding whether to speak, to notice the tension in someone's shoulders, the tightness in their voice, the specific silence that meant danger was coming. You learned when to shrink, when to perform, when to disappear just enough to avoid becoming a target. No one taught you this consciously. Your nervous system figured it out on its own. When a child grows up needing to predict emotional shifts, their brain becomes exceptionally tuned to patterns. The prefrontal cortex learns to anticipate. The amygdala learns to stay alert. The body learns that relaxation is a luxury it cannot afford. Over years, vigilance transforms into identity. You stop thinking of yourself as someone who watches carefully. You simply become someone who sees everything, as if it were always part of who you are. This is where most overly aware adults misunderstand themselves. They assume something is wrong with them, that they're anxious, neurotic, unable to just relax like everyone else. But what they're actually experiencing is the residue of intelligence shaped by necessity. Their sensitivity wasn't born from weakness, it was forged in adaptation. The tragedy is that survival programming doesn't know when to retire. Your environment may now be stable, your relationships may be safe, but your nervous system still operates as though everything could change in an instant. So it keeps scanning, keeps listening, keeps preparing for a threat that no longer exists. This is why awareness so often comes paired with exhaustion. You're not tired because life is too demanding. You're tired because your internal security system never learned it's allowed to stand down. Understanding this origin is the first step toward freedom. It replaces self-judgment with context. It allows compassion to enter the space where criticism used to live. You weren't born hyper-aware. You became this way because paying attention once kept you safe. And the path forward isn't about erasing that awareness. It's about teaching your system that the emergency is over, even if the sensitivity remains. There's another dimension to hyper-awareness that rarely gets discussed. It's not just about seeing patterns in the world. It's about feeling what others feel, whether you want to or not. For deeply aware people, empathy isn't something they choose to activate. It runs constantly in the background, like software that has no quit button. You don't just listen to someone speak. You feel the emotional weight underneath their words. You sense when they're holding something back. You notice the micro-expressions, the slight drop in their shoulders, the moment their eyes lose focus for half a second. Long before anything is said directly, you already know something is wrong. Psychology calls this cognitive empathy, the ability to model another person's internal experience without being told. But for the hyper-aware, it goes beyond modeling. It becomes absorption. Other people's emotions don't stop at the boundary of your awareness. They cross over into your body. A tense room makes your chest tight. A friend's unspoken sadness follows you home hours later. Someone else's anxiety starts vibrating in your own nervous system. This is what others rarely see. From the outside, you appear calm, grounded, emotionally intelligent. You're the person who reads between lines, chooses words carefully, knows exactly when to pause and when to soften. People feel safe around you because you make them feel genuinely seen. But there's a hidden cost. When you're perpetually tuned into everyone else's frequency, you start carrying emotions that were never yours. You absorb guilt, tension, disappointment without anyone asking you to. And because you understand exactly where those feelings originate, you rarely push them away. You hold them, manage them, regulate the entire room so others can feel at ease. Over time, this creates a profound imbalance. You become the emotional container, the one who absorbs and translates and smooths everything over. And while this looks like strength, it quietly leads to depletion. Because here's the painful truth. When you're always the one who understands, nobody thinks to ask whether you need understanding too. Empathy that never powers down doesn't just connect you to others, it slowly teaches you to vanish inside that connection, to prioritize their comfort over your own existence. That's when awareness stops feeling like a gift and starts feeling like weight. Not because you care too much, but because you're running multiple nervous systems simultaneously, and no one designed you to do that indefinitely. And now we arrive at perhaps the most painful truth about hyperawareness, something that sounds contradictory until you've lived it. The deeper you see, the harder it becomes to truly connect. At some point, awareness stops being just observation. It becomes revelation. You start seeing behind the curtain of human behavior. You notice that people don't always mean what they say. That kindness sometimes carries hidden conditions. That affection can arrive wrapped in unspoken expectations. You realize that most interactions aren't purely about connection. They're also about reassurance, validation, image management, or fear. Not because humans are cruel, but because humans are complicated. And with that understanding comes a strange kind of loss. When you perceive too deeply, it becomes difficult to enjoy anything at face value. Compliments feel layered with agenda. Apologies feel strategically incomplete. Promises sound fragile even when they're sincere. You can still appreciate a moment, but there's always a quiet awareness of what might be happening beneath the surface. This is the awareness paradox, where the very trait that lets you understand people profoundly is the same trait that creates invisible distance from them. You become fluent in subtext, but lose the ability to receive words simply as words. You gain insight, but sacrifice a certain kind of relational innocence. The ability to take a gesture at face value, to hear words without automatically translating them, to experience love without immediately scanning for its expiration date. Once you've seen how often people contradict themselves, how fear wears the costume of confidence, how love and insecurity coexist in the same sentence, you can't fully unsee it. Communication becomes something you decode rather than receive. Relationships start feeling like navigation between projection and perception. And the hardest part, you understand that most conversations are actually miscommunication dressed up as agreement. That insight is accurate, but accuracy can be incredibly isolating. Because when you see behind the curtain, you're no longer simply enjoying the performance. You're aware of every string, every lighting trick, every fragile mechanism holding the illusion together. Even when the show is beautiful, part of you knows how easily it could collapse. That knowledge doesn't make you cynical. It makes you careful. And sometimes, more often than you'd like to admit, it makes you deeply lonely. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your country in the comments. I'm curious whether this experience of seeing too much resonates differently across cultures. Type US, Canada, Australia, Philippines, UK, India, or wherever you are. So what do you actually do with all of this? How do you live with a mind that refuses to stop noticing? Here's the truth that took me a long time to understand. The solution to hyperawareness isn't seeing less, it's carrying less. For years, awareness probably felt like responsibility. If you noticed something, you felt obligated to interpret it, respond to it, manage it. But not every signal is an assignment. Not every emotional shift requires your intervention. And not every insight needs to be followed to its logical conclusion. This is where awareness begins maturing into something sustainable. Let me give you 3 specific practices that actually help. First, practice naming without solving. When you notice something, whether it's tension in a room, sadness in a friend, or your own anxiety rising, try simply naming it internally, without immediately trying to fix it. Say to yourself, I notice there's tension here, and then consciously choose not to take responsibility for resolving it. This small act creates separation between perception and obligation. Second, build what I call release rituals. At the end of each day, spend 3 minutes writing down emotions you absorbed that weren't originally yours. A coworker's stress, a partner's frustration, a stranger's heaviness on the train. Write them down, then consciously say, these were never mine to carry. This sounds simple, but it trains your nervous system to distinguish between your feelings and borrowed ones. Third, practice the 3-breath pause. When you catch yourself spiraling into analysis, whether it's about someone's message or your own reaction, take 3 slow breaths before doing anything. In those breaths, ask yourself one question: is this mine to solve or just mine to notice? Often the honest answer is that it's just observation, not obligation. These aren't instant fixes, they're practices, and practices require patience. The goal isn't to become unaware. That would be losing something valuable. The goal is selective perception, learning to notice without absorbing, to recognize without reacting, to let certain things pass through your awareness instead of taking up permanent residence. Not every silence is a message. Sometimes people are simply tired. Not every feeling requires action. Emotions can move through you without being analyzed to completion. Not every insight demands expression. Some understandings are meant to be held quietly, not spoken, not solved, not examined further. This isn't about becoming indifferent. It's about restoring balance. Awareness without boundaries becomes suffering. Awareness with boundaries becomes clarity. When you stop treating every perception as urgent, something shifts in your nervous system. Your body begins learning that noticing doesn't automatically equal danger. Your mind starts accepting that it doesn't need to stay 3 steps ahead just to feel safe. This shift feels uncomfortable at first, like loosening a grip you've relied on for decades, but gradually life changes. You start experiencing moments without immediately stepping outside them to analyze. You laugh without checking why, feel without translating, listen without simultaneously preparing your response. You don't lose your depth, you reclaim your presence, and awareness transforms from a weight you drag through every day into something quieter. A companion instead of a burden. Awareness doesn't need to vanish for you to find peace. It just needs to be refined. When awareness is softened by self-compassion, it stops feeling like a relentless spotlight and starts feeling like gentle warmth. You no longer need to decode every silence or predict every outcome. You begin trusting that not everything requires understanding to be meaningful. Some moments are meant to be felt, not explained. This is where awareness transforms into wisdom. You still notice deeply, but you hold it loosely. You still feel intensely, but you let emotions move through without demanding they justify themselves. You understand people without disappearing inside their stories. Presence gradually replaces prediction, curiosity replaces fear, and something quiet but profound shifts. Life becomes lighter, not because anything external changed, but because you stopped trying to carry all of it simultaneously. If any of this felt familiar, If you recognized your own mind somewhere in these words, know that you're not alone. This channel exists for people who feel deeply and think carefully about what it means to be human. If this brought you any value, consider subscribing so we can continue these conversations. And if something specific resonated, leave it in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to finally feel understood. You were never too much, never too sensitive, never broken for seeing what others miss. You were simply awake in a world that often rewards sleeping through it. And maybe the answer was never about dimming your awareness. Maybe it was always about learning to rest, even while the light stays on.